Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new SER report publication event. So today's event is about the future of European rail in the face of climate, but also financial challenges. We had a full team of SER academics working on this report for almost a year. So the lead author is Yves Crozet, who's here with us today to present the report's findings and recommendations. And he was, of course, supported in this by Paolo Beria, Heike Link, and Thierry Van Elslander. And this report, of course, we've received input from several SER members who are here with us today to join our panel. But before we move to the panel discussion, of course, we'll listen to a presentation of the report, its main findings by Yves. So that will take the first roughly 15-20 minutes of our event, and then after that we'll move to a discussion format. During the presentation and during the panel, you can of course drop any questions you may have in the questions box, which is at the bottom of the screen, and I'll try and feed these questions to Yves and to our panelists as the discussion progresses. Until then, I'll give the floor to Yves, who will get us started. Yves, please.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Alberic, for the introduction. The presentation of the report will be divided into two parts. And the first one is about the main findings. You have a quick summary in front of you. So clearly, the rail transport is the lowest emitter of greenhouse gases in absolute and relative value. And so it's necessary to support the rail transport. But if we look at the former promises of rail 20 years ago in the white paper, for instance, we are facing some kind of broken promises because the modal shift to rail is not self-evident in terms of modal sharing. We must be very the principle of substitution. That is to say, we will see that it's not easy to consider that more people in rail, it's automatically less people on car or on aviation. And the second finding is that the rail is heavily dependent on public subsidies, and there is a risk of diminishing returns of public subsidies. No diminishing returns of rail. Rail is clearly a mode with increasing returns, but there is a risk of diminishing returns of public subsidies. And then we have also the climate commitments. And in order to achieve the climate commitments, maybe it's not enough to consider modal shift, but maybe it's necessary to question and even to curb the development of other modes of transport. So we can go to the next one. If you look now at the first point of these findings about the rail modal share, the question is why we can go to the next slide now. Why we have, even if a lot of things have been done by the European Union, there is really an arsenal to develop the demand, to develop the supply. We have the railway package. We have a lot of mechanisms pushing the rail. Nevertheless, next slide, please. What we observe for the 20 years before the pandemic, it's a report given from for the Tran Commission of the European Parliament. You observe that the modal share of rail for freight air is almost stable and even decreasing a little from 14% to 11%. And the modal share of the trucks is growing a little. And next, please, it is the same for passengers. That is to say, the passenger car, the modal share is more than 70%, and for rail, it's between 6 and 6.5%. So we have clearly a kind of glass ceiling for rail. It is as if it was impossible to increase the modal share of rail, both for freight and for passengers. Next, please. And now we have the financial issues. That is to say, we have the rising unit cost for public subsidies before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and even after the pandemic. And the financing of rail is more and more based on public funding. And even on high-speed rail, that is to say, the commercial traffic, sometimes without any subsidies, we observe a diminishing intensity of traffic. Next, please. The first example about the risk of diminishing returns of public subsidies is in France. You have here the public subsidy in euro cents per passenger kilometer for the Transilien. That is to say, the regional trains in Paris region. And you observe that the cost per passenger kilometer is growing for about 12 to 18 euro cents per passenger kilometer. That is to say, 3 times more than inflation. It's surprising because the Paris region is a very dense area. The quantity of people in the train is very high. Nevertheless, the cost of these trains is very high also. Next, please. The second example is about Italy, because as you know, in the report, we have 4 case studies about Italy, Germany, France, and Belgium. I will not present in detail the case studies, but just some slides in relation with different countries. If you look at Italy, we observe not an increase, but was a high level of public subsidies between 6 and 7 billion euro per year until the pandemic. And we will see that some other subsidy will come after the pandemic. Next, please. A third example is Germany. In last March, the German Court of Auditors published a very critical report on the DB, and mentioning that the debt of Deutsche Bahn is growing of about 3 million euro per day since 2014. That is to say, going from 2020, a little more than 20 to more than 30 billion euro. Next, please. And coming from the same report from the German Court of Auditors, we have this graph about the money, and we observe that the ticketing, a little less than 10 billion euro per year, and infrastructure charge, 3.8, it's less than 50% of the total revenue necessary to finance the rail system. That is to say, more and more public money to finance the rail system. Next, please. And just a quick view on the intensity of traffic. It was underlined by the European Court of Auditors in a report some years ago that finally, the more we extend the high-speed rail network, the more we reduce the intensity of traffic. And even in France, where the intensity of traffic is rather high, close to 20 million passenger kilometers per kilometer, even with that, we observe that a decreasing intensity of traffic when in 2017, we enlarge, we extend the size of the high-speed rail network. So next, please. And now we address the issue of CO2 emission, because the CO2 emission of transport are a big issue in all the countries under review and in all European countries, because the emission remain at a high level in comparison with industry, for instance. It's an important share of European CO2 emission, and the growth of traffic rail has not been able to change anything. Next, please. Here you have the case of Germany with the CO2 emission of transport in gray, and what you observe on the black line is the share of CO2 emission of transport in the total of CO2 emission, and we observe that this share is now close to 30%, a little less in 2020 because of the pandemic. And that is to say a high level. It is the same in almost the same in France. Next, please. This is the case of Italy, the CO2 transport emission in Italy, and you observe that during all the decade between the 2010, it is about the same level of emission, except during the pandemic in 2020. But in 2021 and 22, the CO2 emission in Italy came back to the level of 2019. So the next, please. And if we look at the case of Belgium, it is also the same landscape. That is to say, you have a reduction in the emission of CO2 emission in the majority of CO2 emitters, but not in commercial and in transport, where we have an increase of CO2 emission for transport sector from 1990 to 2017. Next, please. And if we look at France now, what you have here, it's not the CO2 emission, it is the distance in kilometer per inhabitant and per year. On the left scale, you have the car traffic, that is to say, with the big car at the beginning of the century, it's about 10,000 kilometers per year by car, and in green, it is the right axis. You have the travel by train, a little more than 1,000 kilometers per year, and almost a stagnation since the Lehman Brothers crisis. And you have in blue the distance per inhabitant in kilometer. It is also the right axis by air, and we are now we were before the pandemic more than 2,500 kilometers per inhabitants. And due to that, we have no reduction in the CO2 emission of transport in France. Next, please. So if we look now at the detail of the graph about the modal split for passenger transport in Europe, we observe that we have a big success of rail from 1996 to 2016. That is to say, 30% more of traffic. It's a good success. But if we now we look at the second graph, we observe that it's not 20 years of loneliness. That is to say, the car traffic, the road traffic, is increasing at the same rhythm, at the same speed than the rail traffic. And if now next we compare with the attractiveness of aviation, we observe everywhere in Europe, and not only in France, a big attractiveness of aviation, and then no modal shift in favor of rail, but a modal shift in favor of aviation, and it is the main issue. So next, please. And we have now to present our recommendation, that is to say, the second part of my presentation and the main part of the report. What we propose is a more realistic approach about rail and decarbonization. The problem is that the development of rail transport is an issue, and the CO2 emissions of transport is also an issue. Whatever the national priorities, but we need a more realistic approach, because it's not enough to make big announcement effects about rail, about modal shift. Some people say that we can double the traffic of rail and so on. I think it's not realistic, and we will see some example. Next, please. So what in the coming decades in Italy, in Germany, in Belgium, in France, and so on? So we have some questions about the potential growth of rail traffic. We have some doubts about the expected modal shift. And we have also some doubts about the expected reduction of transport CO2 emission. Next, please. The first question can come from Belgium. Here we have a document from the Belgian Federal Planning Office with a realistic view about the freight transport. The idea is to increase the quantity of freight transports by 20% from 2019 to 2040. And maybe because of the volume, even if the structure of the demand is not in favor of rail, because of the change in the demand of goods. And next, and we have the same realistic view in Belgium about the passenger transport, excuse me, it's not the freight transport here, it is the passenger transport, excuse me. It's only an increase of 6% during the coming 2 decades. And maybe we can criticize this view saying, oh, it's not very optimistic, but maybe my view is that it's more realistic that some ideas to double the traffic in 10 or 20 years. Next, please. We have also the same doubts about the potential growth of traffic in Germany. This is a graph from the German Court of Auditors, and they mention in the comments of the graph that we have today in Germany unrealistic assumptions on long-distance rail transport, long-distance rail passenger traffic, how to have almost a doubling from 45 billion passenger kilometer to almost 90 passenger kilometer in less than 10 years. And next, please. We have also the same doubts about modal shift coming this time from the European Court of Auditors, a report published in last March. And they also mention in the comments unrealistic assumption on freight modal shift. If you look at the doubling of rail traffic, rail freight traffic until 2050, and 50% more for the navigation, inland navigation. It's also very, very optimistic because the inland navigation traffic is declining even on the Rhine River during the last years. Next, please. And we can also have some question about Italy, because in Italy we have a very, very effective high-speed rail system with competition between NTV and Trenitalia, and we observe the growing market share of high-speed rail. But if we look at the absolute value between 1990 and 2016, there is almost no increase of the global volume of long-distance traffic in Italy. That is to say, we have competition between conventional and high-speed rail, but not a lot with air traffic, for instance. And the rail traffic in Italy remains at a level of 6 or 7% of the total passenger traffic is rather low. Next, please. And if we look now at the CO2 emission from transport, instead of the minus 55% proposed by the European Commission, if I look at the publication of the European Environmental Agency, the forecast is we will have a reduction of only minus 6% from 1990 to 2030. Minus 6% only. It's very low, even with the new measures, because you have 2 gray line, and the gray line is taking into account the new contents of the Green Deal of 2020. And next, please, if we look now at the detail, a graph given by the European Environmental Agency, you have at the top the CO2 emission of air traffic, and you have a growing, it is the same for maritime traffic and domestic air traffic. And we have only a reduction of CO2 emission for car traffic, the two gray line. We have a clear reduction thanks to the electrification of cars. But finally, we have a very small reduction of CO2 emission. Next, please. And now, if we look, a quick look to the national priorities presented in the report, we have clearly a big difference between Italy, because Italy is using the money coming from the European Union to have a big push to high-speed rail. It is very different in Germany and in Belgium, where clearly we have a priority to daily mobility, to the maintenance and the renewal of the classical network. And maybe, as usual, maybe France is not very clear because it's difficult in France to choose between the support of high-speed rail, new high-speed line, for instance, between Bordeaux and Toulouse, and to support in the same time the renewal and the maintenance of the classical network. And what is interesting is that in all these four countries, we still have some doubts about the money. We have had a lot of big announcements in Germany, 80 billion euro for train, in France, 100 billion for train, and so on. But clearly, we are not sure that the money will be effectively given to the rail. Next, please. So this is the case of Italy, the big push to high-speed rail. You observe that for the coming 5-year comings, we observe a big increase of public subsidies to rail, mainly because of the money coming from the PNRR, that is to say from the European Union. Even if we know now that it's difficult for Italy to spend the money promised by European Union because of administrative and some other kind of inertia. Next, please. In Germany, we can understand the necessity to put the money on the maintenance and the renewal and the improvement of the classical network, because if we look at the overall capacity of the DB infrastructure, that is to say, the number of train kilometers per network kilometer, it's clear that we have had a big increase in Germany, and due to that, we had now more delay, low reliability of train, and a lot of DB customers are complaining about the low quality of the DB supply. Next, please. And we are now facing the last part of the second part, that is to say the idea of financing and regulation. What we propose is that we have to address in the same time the issue of financing a rail system and the issue of regulation of mobility. That is to say, the financing of decarbonization is heavily dependent on public subsidy. We need a lot of public money, of private, but also public money for the decarbonization. And we have no exact information about the money. So what we propose is a new combination of regulation and financing. Next, please. If we want to decarbonize transport, we have, according to The Economist, 4 options. We have the option of norms, standards, and public subsidy at the top right of the graph. And then we have at the bottom on the right side, the taxation and pricing. And on the left side, we have the idea of emission trading schemes. And on the left side at the top, maybe why not some case of rationing when we will be obliged to curb some kind of mobilities. Next, please. And then if we compare the regulation and the decarbonization to the financing, clearly what we need for the rail system today is earmarking. That is to say, we need to have the money going directly from the tax and the revenue of quota to the rail system and to urban transport system. So clearly, we have to set up this kind of mechanisms. So next, now we finish with two slides with the recommendation. So clearly, the rail transport needs new financial resources, but not coming from the customers, passenger or goods. And the revenues for rail can come from environmental taxes, and in particular from the taxation of greenhouse gas emission and carbon tax and the future resources from the European ETS market. And on the scale of the European Union, fuel taxes represent today more than 200 billion euro, and the earmarking of this tax or part of this tax varies from one country to another, but part of it could benefit for the rail transport. And then the last slide. So in the decade to come, road will remain the main vector of transport. It's important to underline that. Road will remain the main vector of transport, and then air transport. So air transport and road will remain the major emitter. So its use must be regulated more strictly, and road pricing is necessary to reduce the demand and to obtain the resource, part of which could be useful for rail. It is the main idea of financing and regulation with the same leverage. So three forms of road pricing already exist. They could be more widely mobilized, both to control demand and to free up resources. Taxes on fuel on CO2 emission, user fee, which should be extended with the implementation of the new Eurovignette directive. And don't forget that we need probably a road user charge for electric vehicles because they don't pay the fuel taxes, and the right to access to urban areas, which could be coupled with mobility passes integrated to the various urban mobility services, as we presented in a previous report of SER about the mobility as a service. So thank you for listening. And now we have the discussion with the panelists.
So Yves, for, as you said, painting a very realistic picture of the state of the European rail sector. Just before we move to the panelists, I just have a very simple question from the audience, which is about the sources of rail traffic data. Is it from Eurostat?
Yes, the rail traffic data are mainly for Eurostat or for the national data system. Okay, thanks a lot, Yves.
So moving on to our panel, I'm going to give everyone a chance to quickly react to the presentation and its main findings before asking everyone a bunch of follow-up questions. But I'd like to first introduce the panel. So we've got Petar with us, who's joining us, who's a member of the European Parliament and part of the Transport Committee. Monica, who's joining us from the European Rail Infrastructure Managers, Thomas from Belgian Rail Infrastructure Manager Infrabel, and Olivier from the French Transport Regulatory Authority. So welcome everyone, and so I'll give you all first the chance to react, and maybe I'll start with you, Petar, to give you a chance to give an introductory statement and a reaction to the presentation we just heard from Yves.
Well, thank you. First, allow me to thank you for having me in this conversation. This is really important. And to be honest, I prepared something as an initial how to say, remarks, but then I will change it because I would like to comment on the survey, because it was really interesting. To be honest, I was a bit disappointed because we noticed that we clearly see the increase of the subsidies, but at the same time, we don't see any increase of the share. Yes, when we speak about the nominal numbers, we do have some increase, but when it comes to share, definitely not enough. So this was maybe my first disappointment. Of course, I would like maybe to disagree with some of the conclusions from the survey, because I think that with all those new measures that we are now having related to the decarbonization of transport, we will end up 2030 with way more than 6% decrease of the greenhouse gas. Speaking only about because I've been working detailedly on road transport, only on road transport we will have a huge decrease, having in mind that we already adopted the CO2 standards for light duty vehicles. Now we are discussing the CO2 standards for heavy duty vehicles. But of course, when we're speaking about the finance, yes, I agree that maybe this is the biggest challenge, because we clearly do rely on public financing here. It's very difficult to create a business model. Of course, there is a business model, but it is really difficult. And I must agree that the money is not enough. Yes, we do have CEF. We spent over 25 billion for rail infrastructure and for railways in the last 6 years of the previous period. We also have let's see, we do also have a European Structural and Investment Fund. We have a Recovery and Resilience Fund. To be honest, in my own Recovery and Resilience Fund for my own country, we envisage to buy and to change the locomotives and wagons and to build some new infrastructure. But I must agree that the money is still not being enough. In terms of recommendations, I do support the idea to take some money from the ETS. In fact, when we speak about ETS2, let me be honest, I do not agree to take any money from there, because they're supposed to contribute to support the vulnerables. ETS2, you know, the money coming, the taxation from the fossil fuels. But of course, when it comes to ETS, the normal ETS, the rail sector can benefit from the financial funds gathered under the ETS, because under the new rules, at least 10% of the revenues generated from the auctioning of the ETS allowances will be used for the development of public transport, in particular climate-friendly passenger and freight rate transport. And when you speak about the advantages, let's be honest. Rail connects people. For closer union, we need more rail. When it comes to climate protection, rail passenger emits 80% less than air passenger and 75% less than car travel. It is the greenest and the safest mode. It accounts only 0.4% of the greenhouse gas emissions from transport. And in fact, when we speak about the decarbonization of rail, we are already beyond, because the European railways already deliver zero emission transport, because 4 out of 5 trains are electric. Also, the rail drives industrial development, and I can count on many advantages. Of course, maybe if we have time later, we will speak about the challenges. The money is one of the challenges, the energy challenges, because let's be honest, the COVID, the energy price hike impacted heavily the railway sector. And of course, like I said, proper financing and some other challenges. But I hope with those new measures and with the proposals that are coming from the European Commission, we will end up in increase the share of the rail in the European economy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Petar, for this more optimistic take on the future of rail model share. Maybe I'll give the floor to Monica now to react on behalf of EIM and to give us another European perspective on this before I'll go to Thomas and Olivier for a Belgian and French perspective. Monica, please.
Merci, Alberic. So thank you very much for this good initiative and for the report. The report is a bit of a tough one because it really pinpoints at one of the greatest weaknesses in rail is actually the costs of the investments. And so it is not a political investment, meaning in the next 4 to 5 years within a government's mandate, you will see tangible results. It normally takes a bit longer. You see it everywhere. The report is also showing where rail does not deliver to the extent the infrastructure is spent. Meaning the €9 ticket, for example, a lot of money is spent, and CO2 emissions or the savings have been relatively low compared to the investments. We have now the discussions on the €49 ticket, and that is a very interesting topic to see how much this will generate a modal shift. And there is a political discussion going down to €29 actually, to make sure that the effect on the market will be higher. But it's not only about the ticket price as such, it's about the availability of capacity. And this is where any non-investment or late investment is actually delaying the modal shift. And you can see it in different member states where they try to catch up with in decades partly of non-investment. You can see it in Germany, but you can also see it in Italy. Belgium is a smaller country where you need more capacity desperately. So there have been big announcements. You have seen also the big announcement of Elisabeth Borne in France. So all these announcements have to be translated into concrete commitments. And this is where the problems start, because it's not only having the money available, but it's to implement the money on time and according to purpose. And this is quite complex, because very often you have a space issue. You have a resource issue, and this resource is not only the human resource, it's also the technical resource. We have an issue with raw material, we have an issue with energy prices, and you see this in those countries where you have a lot of investments going on now, where they struggle with the higher investment costs and also with qualified labor. So there's a huge issue. And so I do not want to depict a black picture. I'm from the infrastructure managers, and EIM, we tend to be very positive. So rail has a future and must have a future, and including with that rail infrastructure, of course. So I don't know at this stage and today which mode of transport can transport so much volumes of people on such a small space. And so the success of the high-speed trains has been remarkable, and it has also generated a lot of industrial intelligence, let me put it like that, both on the suppliers and the manufacturer side, but now also on the IT side. So the generation of a market economy comes with investments in infrastructure. And so, and also the cohesion is very important within the different parts of the EU. And you can see that one of the first topics to enlarge the EU is with transport, is land-bound transport. And so there will be a pre-feasibility study published in mid-June of the EIB, the European Investment Bank, to look into how the different infrastructure requirements can be harmonized between the Ukrainian one and the European one. And so that will be very interesting to see how much market perspectives and growth perspectives do we have. Let's imagine that we will find a way to make both networks more harmonized. We have a huge market potential, also volumes for rail infrastructure managers down to Spain or even Portugal, and that is quite interesting as a topic. And you can also see that there are foreign investments in infrastructure. So investments in infrastructure are strategic. They are strategic from a geostrategic perspective. So in maritime, you have seen this with a ship in the Suez Canal which got blocked, and the effect that had on the wider transport flows. So rail is a very strategic connector between economies, markets, and also trade partners. And so the report comes at the right time. The report is not that positive, saying, okay, despite the investments, we are not delivering the results we want. However, then the report provides an opportunity why. So there have been different reasons exploited in the report. I would say, let's go further on these reasons, and also let's look at what are member states doing with their railway systems. So you need to define what the railway system should deliver. Is it a high performance network? Is it a social network? Is it a is it a political network that exists as well? So we need to have a sort of harmonized vision on a meta layer, let me put it like that, what the single European railway area should do. And this is something, as it's a debate which has never been held, or not to a level which should have been done. And so as long as you do not have a harmonized or even a single vision of what the European railway system should do, you will always have a very patchy approach to infrastructure, rail infrastructure, and how it connects in between across borders, but also with ports, with stations, and with other modes of transport. So that's my take.
Thanks a lot, Monica, for painting a very complete picture. I'll have a couple of follow-up questions for you after that. But first, I'll ask maybe Thomas. I saw you opinating to some of Monica's comments, so I'll give you a chance to follow up on this.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Of course, I'm in agreement with all what Monica said, and I'm happy to see this report finally coming to an end. And who cannot agree on the conclusion? The rail is green, the rail has the best societal impact compared to any other transport mode for medium and long distance. And we all have to admit and to acknowledge a brutal reality. Modal shift is complex to achieve. Maybe to narrow down my comments, I would split the discussion because there is no one silver bullet to solve all the problem. What we have three different cases, and I think you can see that through all the the case study from the report. We have one challenge around long distance or international transport, where the plane has taken a very good position thanks to a lot of subsidies, thanks to an excellent industrial organization, and where we need to tackle also the same from the railway perspective to compete against that. The same goes for the regional train around the cities, where the car took a huge place. I think in the numbers from Yves, we see that 90% of those transport are made by cars. Also, we as railway companies have to find the best approach to compete against this means of transport. And then the third domain, where you see that the truck driver can come all along from Bulgaria, Czech, Germany, Portugal to Belgium and vice versa, seamless, without any stops except to sleep and to fuel sometimes. We see clearly that the freight by railroad has a huge disadvantage. So we need to tackle those three domains with different options, and I'm happy to discuss some of those options today during this panel.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We'll come back to that. And then finally, Olivier, to get your perspective as the French perspective, but also the national regulator perspective on this report.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. So I think, first of all, the report shows that we are at a crossroad with regards to the rail system in Europe. And I think this report puts on the table some realities that tends to moderate some enthusiastic speeches that we can hear regarding rail. And it urges us to assess the proper axis of development for rail services in Europe. So as a regulator, I would say that one of the main topics is how to maintain and develop infrastructure, because infrastructure is at the core of the provision of rail services. And I think the question is, what do we want and what is it reasonable to achieve for the infrastructure in order to provide the freight and the passenger rail services? So I believe, and it is especially the case in France, it is important to fill a gap today, which means to develop a strategic approach regarding the infrastructure and to have a global approach at the European level in order to develop a real single European market regarding rail services. So I think one of the main lessons of this report and that we can share is that infrastructure cannot be financed by itself by track access charges. it requires a huge level of public subsidies in order to be at the level of quality that is required to provide services. The fact that freight services, rail freight services can compete with road freight services is based on the quality and the agility that the infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, can provide to those services. So it is very important to have the right level of financing. And I think when we look at the financing of the railway infrastructure, we have to make the proper choice, which means we cannot develop a new infrastructure if the current infrastructure is not properly maintained and renewed. So I think the first thing is to have the right level of renewal of the existing infrastructure, to modernize it with new signaling systems, the ERTMS signaling system, and then it is possible to develop, but we have to invest in this order and not only to develop without maintaining the existing infrastructure. Also, I think it is important, it has been said in the report, but competition on the market, open access competition, and competition for the market with tendering process regarding TSO contracts can be a very powerful tool. It has been illustrated by some European countries such as Italy for high-speed services, Germany for TSO contracts, in order to enhance rail services and increase the market share of both passenger and freight services with more efficiency than having only one actor, one monopoly incumbent on rail services. So that's what I wanted to say. I think this report will bring some new ideas and pushes us to think at the right level how to develop properly the rail system in Europe.
Thanks a lot, Olivier, and you were the last one to speak now. So I think I'm going to ask you straight away a follow-up question, actually, on your perspective. So the report paints, a picture that's quite diverse of the different models that you see across different countries. So what's your perspective on the report's conclusion on the French approach and the different, what's your perspective on the different strategies and states of play across different countries, for instance, comparing France to Germany, France or Belgium?
Well, I think there are some common perspectives, especially regarding the infrastructure, with different approaches, of course. But in France, what we can say is that, as it is mentioned in the report, there is a lot of level of money for each year, around 3 billion euros per year in order to renew the infrastructure. However, it is not sufficient. And I think this is the same in other countries. It is mentioned in the report. There is a huge level of public subsidies in order to renew the infrastructures, but it is not sufficient, and it has to be more important. In France, for instance, there should be at least 4.5 billion euros per year in order just to maintain the network as it is today, and to maintain it at an age of infrastructure that remains steady. And I understand this is quite the same in Germany, for instance, and that is at the core of our concerns as a regulator. There is a level of investment, and also the fact that infrastructure managers are natural monopolies, and they have to be correctly incentivized in order to optimize their expenses regarding the renewal and the modernization of the network. So that is something at the core of our concerns. Also, the development of competition. For example, Italy is a good example of what has been done regarding high-speed services. I think in France, we are at the beginning of the competition on the market regarding high-speed services, and Italy is a good example of I would say a public policy in order to promote the competition of the market for rail services. We can remember that at the end of the year 2010, the Italian government has downsize the track access charges by 30% in order to develop competition. And it had a very powerful effect because the traffic effect compensated more than the decrease of the level of track access charges. So there have been some success, and we should be inspired by this kind of success.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Mark, coming back to you on the Belgian case study, the Belgian case. I mean, there's been quite a few changes in Belgium over recent months. Both Afrabel and SNCB have had a new performance contract. What's your perspective on the picture that the report paints and on the perspectives of rail in Belgium?
Thank you, Eric. Before I address this question, I just quickly react to Olivier's last statement about the reduction of the track access charges in Italy, who led to more traffic and therefore globally more revenue for LFI. I want to pinpoint that in the case of infrastructure managers, the track access charges are the only revenue we have beside the subsidies, or the main one. And this is the only lever we have to improve the traffic service, the quality of the track, of the operation in general of the rail, where this access charge is representing a small portion of the operator's cost and cost to deliver the service to the final customer. So in general, our experience is that it's more detrimental to the overall quality and to the overall performance of the railway system to decrease track access charges, because we don't have the means as infrastructure managers to support and to give the right level of service to the operators, and therefore we don't support the business. So I would not like to see this case of Italy taken as something we can expand overall. Maybe it's work in Italy for some reason that personally I don't know, but I'm sure that if we apply the same in Belgium, we would go to a catastrophe. Also because the more traffic you have, the more maintenance you need to do to your track. And therefore, even if it's increasing your revenue, if you increase your cost in the same proportion, at the end you lose. So sorry, I'm closing this small parenthesis. So to come back on the Belgium case, indeed, in Belgium, we have been blessed because the government gave us a 10-year frame agreement to operate the network, so until 2032, with a financial plan. The financial plan is an increase compared to what we had before. This financial plan is going to give us some ammunition and some vision to develop our traffic. To maintain our network, to make some debottlenecking, to improve the accessibility to the station, as example. But as I think it has been mentioned by Petar and also in the report, when you increase the subsidies, you don't necessarily increase the share. And there are several reasons for that. The first one, I think, has been mentioned by Monica before me. We are, and certainly in Belgium, have a super dense network, and therefore laying some new tracks, making some new bridges, or giving some more access to the port or to the industries cost more and more money, because the ground is fully busy by industry, by inhabitants, by anything, or by even roads. So indeed, creating new capacity in current situation costs more and more money. That is a fact. And that is a fact that we need to accept. In parallel, we should also not neglect the money that has been invested in the other modes of transport, car or road in general, and planes. And then, of course, our market share is also to fight with the increase of market share of the subsidies on the other mode. So this is on the monetary question. As I mentioned in my introduction, passengers and freight are two different issues. For the passengers, I like what you wrote in the report about the glass ceiling and then the different factors. And I think there is one crucial point that we need to tackle, all the infrastructure managers and public transport, is the cooperation and competition with the other public transport, and materializing the mobility as a service, to make sure that for the people going from home to work, from home to hobby, is as seamless as with the car. So mass, and providing, therefore, behind that, providing a good service of quality to the people is, in my eyes, even more important than the cost or the price of the ticket. And also, we need to tackle with a big change in the demography, the teleworking, the more the people using more the train to go for the hobbies, and also the people getting older and older. We have a study in Belgium that the number of people above 67 years is going to double in the next 15 years. So clearly we have a lot of challenge also in the evolution of the origin and demand and the time of the transport.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Going back to the European level, and this time addressing my question to Petar, as I think I had a follow-up questions, and also that's been mentioned in the questions by the audience. Going back to the European level and the question of cross-border infrastructure rail projects and the lack of the difficulty in progressing on such projects over recent years. Do you feel, and I think that also echoes to a large extent some points were made by Monica earlier, do you think that this should be made, building a European approach to this should be made more of a priority over the next EU mandate between 2024 and 2029? And do you feel there's enough political drive to achieve it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would also maybe want to refer to the previous questions because it's connected to the answer. Yes, I see that especially now with this ambitious green plan, everybody understands that coherence in railway is really important. So from that perspective, I see a clear push for initiatives like those you already mentioned. But to me, the part of the problem is the fact that, for instance, on one hand, because we were speaking about France, France is set to complete the Grand Paris Express project. We will add 200 kilometers of new rail infrastructure for the next decade. At the same time, Germany has announced an investment of 86 billion in the rail infrastructure. At the same time, we have in France, another initiative, the ban of the short-haul domestic flights. And at the same time, we do have some countries that do not move in the same direction, or at least not with the same pace, which makes this coherence even more difficult. But from the legislative point of view, yes, now we are having a new package that is coming from the Commission tackling this. So I hope that this is not going to solve the problem, because yes, I believe personally that the railway can connect metropolitan areas in Europe. It gives faster, it gives cleaner, it gives even more comfortable service. So I think that we should really foster and we should really work on these projects. But in terms of legislative coherence, I see also positive sides. Hopefully, the next mandate, the railway will be a real priority.
Thank you very much, Petar. And same question to you, Monica. What do you think is missing at a European level, not only to tackle the issue of cross-border infrastructure, but really, you mentioned earlier that there's need for a more European vision on what rail infrastructure should look like on the continent. What do you think is missing, and what is necessary for the next mandate?
Yeah, I mean, the great paradigm is that the greenest mode. I mean, the label green for rail is so obvious that it doesn't have any impact. You can say I'm the greenest mode of transport. It's okay, fine, we know this. Then next. So what I perceive also within the scope of the work of EIM, that there's a lot of ambition to make rail and also rail infrastructure more efficient. So delivering faster, delivering better. What I've seen in the past is key performance indicators, speeding up projects, communicating about these projects, about the milestones. And you can see in July that there will be a first greening transport package. There will be a lot to come in the future, and the Commission will not only tackle physical infrastructure, but also operational rules. So they will look into harmonizing, or let's say at least making it more interoperable, everything that deals with capacity and traffic management. So we'll see how far that will go. But on the 11th of July, you can expect a very important proposal on the European capacity and traffic management. And it will not stop there. The Commission also says in a more decarbonized transport environment, which will be the case, let's say 2035, something like that, at least for road or parts of the segments of road, and then will gradually also for aviation. Where is the place of rail if the only argument is that it is green? So, so the ambition of the Commission is, okay, rail has to deliver more, rail in its total ecosystem, meaning it has to communicate better. So you'll see a proposal on ticketing. You will see the proposal on the capacity and the traffic management, including alternative routes when there are contingency issues, long-term and short-term, resilience issues, so alternative routes. You will see something on languages. So the approach on the EU level is clearly targeted toward delivering the single European railway area more on an operational level as well by 2030. Why 2030? Is because you have then the TEN-T core network being delivered by then, and most of the legislation will apply on that access and on these lines. So there will be a lot of reforms coming up for rail, and what I see is there's a lot of ambition also on the, at least on the Commission side, and also partly on the regulator side, although I'm not sure they will be happy with this increased mandate, but to work more with rail, monitor what is being done. But still the unknown factor is in all that, in all the reforms on language harmonization or English or not English, on the train drivers directive, free movements, investments, etc., the unknown factor in all of that is the funding. So there will be a midterm assessment on CEF published by 2025. So if CEF remains a dwarf, so very small compared to the political ambitions, we can regulate until we drop dead. So there will not be much more being done. So a path is a path, so we can over-regulate it. But if it is missing, the regulation will fall short. You cannot instruct, you invest. I mean, if there's no money, there's no investment.
Thanks a lot, Monica and Peter. I just see that you wrote that you have to leave, but thank you again for joining us today, and have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Monica, you mentioned the issue of funding, financing. Going back to Olivier, so for the regulator perspective, the report mentions the possibility of using revenues from carbon taxation and or fuel taxes to finance rail across European countries. What do you think what is the real potential of such measures? What are the limits of what can be achieved on that front, especially when we speak about revenues from, for instance, carbon taxation? Rail would obviously be competing with a lot of other let's say applicants for this money. I mean, Petar mentioned earlier that the money from the new EU ETS should go to vulnerable consumers. So there's a lot of competing interest for this money. So what do you think is actually achievable?
Before answering directly this question, I just wanted to say that I'm okay with what Thomas said regarding track access charges, because as you may know, the French Transport Regulatory Authority, I just published at the beginning of the year a binding opinion regarding the increase by 8% of the track access charges of SNCF Réseau. So we are aware that there is a requirement to finance at the proper level the infrastructure manager, especially when the level of total cost is not reached by the level of track access charges. That I just wanted to mention that at some point there can be some opportunities to find new approaches to to make new competitors enter the market, but there are other tools that are available in order to achieve that. Regarding the financing the ROI infrastructure, as I mentioned, track access charges are not sufficient. Public subsidies are required, but there is a need to find a diversity of means to finance the sector. So, of course, carbon taxes and taxes from the road and so on have to be investigated. I just wanted to raise a little warning. There is a need to assess the side effect of such system, because you can send some wrong signals and maybe achieve something that will not lead to increased market share of the rail. And I think it's very important to assess deeply, to try maybe some local experimentations in order to assess the different effects of new system. Carbon taxing, of course, is a good approach. Using taxation system from the road has to be properly assessed before being generalized. So I think it is better to have some local experimentation to have some proofs of concept before generalizing anything. And also there is, even if in France we are not always completely satisfied with that, but the private-public financing system can be also an approach in order to finance new infrastructure, or to finance infrastructure projects regarding modernization of signaling, for example, that have their own net present value by making the infrastructure manager more efficient.
Thank you, Olivier. Going back to you, Thomas, and yes, with a similar question, what's your perspective on the potential new modes of financing that Yves and his colleagues highlighted in the report?
A new source of revenue, of course, is appealing to the infrastructure managers. So yes, of course, let's explore this way. I agree with Olivier that something need to be checked and proof of concept and go carefully, because indeed there are more vulnerable people, like we have said, people and industry that need to be also protected to go together in this transition rather than left alone. But yes, it's definitely a good idea. Just want to also put a small warning in the timing. I think it has been said before, but I want to emphasize this point. When we have money available as infrastructure managers, we need a long time to spend the money. And when you look at the ECA, so the European Court of Auditors report on the benefit of the freight policy in Europe, they've pinpointed that many projects are late. In Belgium, we are late on some projects as well. And there are many good and bad reasons, but track infrastructure or railway infrastructure needs studies, needs works, needs to plan the works, and the traffic interruption needs permits, and permits are often not in our hands. It's really completely left to local authorities. And also we need to be aware that the European industrial capacity is limited. Put together all the railway contractors for the catenary, for the track, for the signaling, for whatever systems. And if we flood the European railways by too much money, they don't follow. They are not able to follow. So we need to leave time for the industry and the infrastructure managers to get ready with the project. And we cannot expect to flip a button and then get the result immediately. And this is why, by the way, that in Belgium, this 10-year plan we have got give us, and also the Belgium industry or the industry serving Infrabel, the visibility to be ready to deliver that.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. You make a very good point about European industrial capacity and the supply chain issues, and also the need to think about long term. And I think that goes back to the need to earmark funds for the rail sector over the long term in order to be able to deliver on the promises of the sector. At this point, before continuing and addressing some of the questions from the audience, I think maybe I'm going to give the floor back to Yves to react to some comments that have been made.
Yes, thank you, Alberic, and thank you to the panelists, because I agree with mainly with the remarks. Just maybe something a little provocative. I think that in the report we say that it's risky to address the decarbonization issue with only the modal shift in view. We have clearly a problem of developing rail traffic, and we have another problem, the decarbonization. And clearly the rail is green. I agree with Laurent, with Thomas Laurent. Rail is green, but rail is not mainly green. Rail is a key component of our standard of life for poor people without any driving licenses or any car, but also for medium revenue or even rich people, because rail is a key component of our standard of life to enter the central part of the metropolitan areas, to go from a big metropolitan area to another one, and even to visit some new places and so on. And it's because of that, it's because rail is a key component of our standard of life that we need to put money in rail, and especially in the infrastructure. And then if I come back to the discussion about rail access charge, what is interesting is to observe what we decided to change in France. Because when we started the development of high-speed rail system in France 40 years ago, or almost 50 years ago, we decided to have self-financing of high speed. The money should come from the customers. And more we extend the network, and more the money is no more coming. The money for infrastructure is no more coming from the customer. And it is the Italian model. And what is interesting is to observe that even in Germany now, they consider that maybe the public fund is necessary to finance the classical network, and that we have not only to look at rail access charges for the infrastructure manager, or if I try to be more precise, the idea is we have to keep a high level of rail infrastructure charge for the infrastructure manager because it's necessary, but rail access charge could be paid by other people than the rail customers. And for instance, in France, for the regional train, the rail access charge going to SNCF Réseau are coming from the government, and not from the company in charge of regional trains. And it is the main point. Due to the fact that we need to have a high level of rail access charge, but not coming from the customers, we have to earmark the money. And then, as mentioned by Olivier, clearly when you have earmarking, there is a risk, because earmarking can be a support for inefficient monopoly. And then if you have earmarking, you need to have heavy control on the money and a powerful regulator of rail system, as I expect we have in France. Just to finish with a simple example, at the end of May, the French Prime Minister, Elisabeth Borne, said that we have to reduce the CO2 emission of transport in France by 37 million tons before 2030. It's a lot. It's less than, it's 30% less. But she mentioned that the share of modal shift in the 37, it's only 5 million tons. That is to say 12%. That is to say that even from the Prime Minister in France, the modal shift to rail is a very small part of the decarbonization issue. And it's what is mentioned at the end of the report. If you want to decarbonize, you have not only to look at the development of rail system, you have to look at the constraints on the road system and the aviation.
Thanks a lot, Yves. And before I give all panelists the chance to react to your comments, a couple of questions here in the chat, and maybe I'll direct it to you. A simple one, which is about the countries you looked at in the report. Do you see any interesting patterns or promising approaches in the effective use of public funds? Do you feel like it's better used in some places than others, or is it just different approaches, but equivalent?
Yes, I think that there are big differences between the countries, and then according to the local culture, it could be different. But I think that the main message is to say, okay, we have some taxes on carbon, and those taxes have to be earmarked to the investment to reduce the carbon emission. And it's whatever the way you use. What was important in terms of acceptability by the citizens is that you pay some taxes for carbon, you pay some cost for ITS. The money should go to the decarbonization and not to the general revenue of the government.
That makes sense. And there's another question that's about innovation. And the use of funds to drive innovation in rail. Do you see potential for better use of rail revenues, wherever it's coming from, to invest in specific technologies that will further drive decarbonization of the sector?
Yes, but the decarbonization is not a big issue for rail because the level of carbon emission of rail are already very low, and maybe some innovation are necessary for regional trains or some the remaining diesel trains. But clearly, maybe the innovation is not only on the infrastructure or the train, but mainly in the ticketing, as mentioned by Monica, the seamless ticketing with whatever the mode of transport. And seeing that innovation is very, very important in the relation between the rail system and the customer.
Thank you, Yves. Yes, and probably also thinking about innovation that would lead to productivity gains rather than further decarbonization would be required. Thomas, I see you opinating again. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that point on innovation.
Yeah, I will start with innovation because it's one of our hot topic at the moment at Infrabel. Indeed, I would not go for an innovation that is like the maglev or like the Hyperloop and this kind of technology, which will request a huge fixed cost to set up the system and to gain the first network effect. With rail, we already have the network effect, we already have the footprint all around, and I believe more in the innovation to boost our systems three ways. The first way is innovation will help us to increase and to boost our capacity. When you have a more ERTMS level 3 as example, or automatic train operation, you are going on the same stretch of track to get more trains, to increase your capacity. And this is the first way the innovation can help the railway system to provide a better service and therefore to decarbonize the transport. And as mentioned by Alberic, today we see more and more innovation to increase the life cycle time of the component, to improve the condition monitoring and such a thing. So the productivity is the second big pillar of innovation to help the railways, and also, of course, integration, the data and the integration with the other mode of transport to realize the mass is obviously a third one. And of course, we have also technology that are now coming that we are, of course, exploring, like any infrastructure managers, the battery trains, rather than the hydrogen trains is a good example that will also request some development from the infrastructure side, which are more limited than to put catenary all around. So yes, innovation is definitely a huge enabler to become more efficient in the rail for the capacity, for the productivity, and for the integration as the mass. Then I wanted to react on Yves' comment on the provocative question that I like. The track access charges, the example given is the Lisea case, I believe, where the track access charge is in average 10 times bigger than the rest of Europe. So indeed, the real track access charge that you want to make pay is way bigger than what is invoiced now by the infrastructure managers to the operating companies. And then, of course, I fully agree with the comment that investing in the rail is also helping the more vulnerable people because the car are going to become more and more inexpensive stuff. The battery car are more expensive. All is going to become more expensive for the car, and developing more the public transportation in general is a good action. It's something to be done for the more vulnerable people as well as for the climate change.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Monica, and after that, Olivier, on well, if you want to reply to Yves' provocative comments and maybe comment or the point on innovation.
I can make a start. Yes, indeed. I mean, innovation is extremely important. So we have a very strong agenda for digitalization. That is one point which is extremely important, both on the operational requirements, but also on the infrastructure investment. So in the past 10 years, at least, many investments involve innovation and digitalization and automation. Otherwise, you cannot drive the infrastructure forward. And there are also more and more data requirements and reporting obligations imposed on infrastructure managers, which make it very difficult to do this the way we do it today. So we need to have much more automated collection of data and analysis of data, also within the context of resilience, of connectivity, multimodal connectivity. There's a lot of demand on the EU level. So innovation for rail and especially rail infrastructure managers is crucial to bring us into the next century. And we need to do this now. The only thing, again, is to persuade the financial decision makers to fund this, but it has a huge potential afterwards in terms of added value.
Thank you very much, Monica. Olivier, do you want to come back to some of the comments made by Yves?
So I just wanted to say that I fully agree with the fact that innovation is very important in the rail sector in order to maintain this sector and to try to develop a modal shift. Because what we can say, investing now in new technologies regarding the infrastructure and also the automation of some system and also ticketing is a reduction of cost for tomorrow, actually. So it is very important to invest now in order to make the train services remain attractive for passengers and for freight, and also for a given level of service to decrease the cost of using the infrastructure, and then to try to keep the retail prices at a fair level, especially in order to remain competitive with the other transport modes. And so it's very important. And as a regulator, I would say it is at the core of our concerns to try to keep under pressure, I would say, the infrastructure manager in order to invest for new technologies, for developing RTMS, for developing new signaling system with cost of maintenance that are lower and so on, in order to make the rail system still competitive with other modal systems.
Thank you, Olivier. And we've got 5 minutes left, so I think I'm just going to use these 5 minutes to ask a last question to Yves, actually, because you conclude the report saying that the rationing of certain modes of transport certainly need to be seriously considered now if we're serious about the EU climate targets. However, I mean, it's a growing debate. We've seen the debate around the use of private jets or short domestic lines in France. But it's also a policy that could be very politically and socially costly, and that could lead to, let's say, backlash and pushback on some climate policies by European governments. How do you see this debate evolving, and do you think that there's a serious chance to implement this type of policies in the next few years?
Mhm. Yes, thank you. So clearly, when I mentioned the rationing, it's very strange for an economist to mention this idea of rationing. But my view is the following. We are in an affluent society, as indicated by Galbraith 60 years ago. And the problem of the affluent society is that the overuse, the misuse of, for instance, road space, the misuse of land, and so on. And because we are living in an affluent society, we have, for instance, to limit the number of flights of landing in an airport. Recently, the director of Schiphol Import in the Netherlands decided to ban the private jet, not because he is against aviation, but because there is a sailing. The Dutch government decided to limit the number of takeaway and landing in Schiphol Airport. And then the director of the airport is obliged to ration the system and to say, okay, no more private jet because it's very small capacity and I need jets with high capacity. And it is the same in the city with the low emission zone, and it is the same in France now with the land use. We have to limit the consumption of land and so on, and not because we are poor, but because we are in an affluent society. And I am not in favor of rationing all the goods and all the services, but when you have some critical issues about the negative effects, the external cost of some consumption, we have to consider the rationing as an option.
Thank you very much, Yves. We'll conclude with these comments. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Yves, for presenting, and you and your colleagues for producing this great report. Thank you to everyone, to our panelists and their organizations also for their contributions throughout the production of this project, during the delivery of this project. Yeah, so we'll leave it here for today, and hopefully we can organize some follow-up events in the next few months to continue discussing this issue. And yeah, thank you very much again, and have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.